fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood Satellite.
It's called The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a pretty famous book, like New York Times bestseller, by Robert Greene, published by Penguin. So it's a pretty big book too. It's getting up around 500 pages. So I'd heard people talking about this, and I'm like, I'm going to give it a shot, because I was getting more into some neo-reactionary stuff about the nature of power and the scientific investigations of power. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. I'll give it a shot. But the best-selling book for those who want power, watch power, or want to arm themselves against power. This is what it says on the back. Just to give you a brief intro. Amoral, cunning, ruthless, and instructive, this piercing work distills 3,000 years of history of power into 48 well-explicated laws. You know, and just to say that the 48 was chosen because that's an odd number and it stands out. If it was just like the 50 laws of power or 20 laws of power, it wouldn't work, because there is a lot of duplicate laws in this, or a lot of laws that could have been compressed into just one or two laws. But he had to pick this because it's a kind of an odd number, and that's why it stuck out. So that in itself is a power play. But I read this book, and years ago I read The Prince by Machiavelli, which is a very good book that people should read. And I also read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And these books are always given out as, must-read books, and they are, and you should read them. But I found that there's just a few commonalities between all of them. And by reading these three books, I've really just come to the 3 laws of power. If you want to achieve power and dominance over an enemy, it's really just these 3 laws. It's make yourself indispensable, flexibly make yourself likable, and be enigmatic. So it's like, be deceptive, be likable, and be confusing. That's it. That's really it, once you break it down at all. Because The Art of War, when I read it, again, seminal work, but it was a lot of, if you are far, appear close. If you are weak, appear strong. It's just like, it's going on and on about be deceptive. Make sure your enemy doesn't know what you're doing. That's it. That's really all you need to do. Then there's other, of course, applications for that, and you can describe the applications, and you can just point to history and say, here's a situation where it does, but that's really it in The Value of Intelligence. And The Prince by Machiavelli, I found that a lot of that book is, you got to make yourself likable. So Machiavelli's The Prince, it's a very good book, but a lot of the parts are, it's an instruction manual if you are a prince. So it's like, if you're a prince and you find yourself in power, here's the things you need to be aware of. And the book goes into a lot of different scenarios where it's like, let's say you were given a kingdom versus, let's say you fought yourself up through a kingdom versus you were elected to a kingdom. So the one I found interesting was like, you're a prince who's just like appointed to a kingdom. Now, what do you do? How do you make it so you're not assassinated within a year? Because it's described like, okay, you're an outsider in this place. You don't really know. Let's remove the hostilities. Let's say, ignoring the fact that there's people who don't like you and want to kill you just because they don't like you or don't like the king or whatever. They don't like you because you're an outsider, or they've got their own way of doing things, and you will always be apart from them. So in a lot of ways, it's currying favor with not only the people, but the institutions within that kingdom. So with every kingdom, you might be, quote, the guy in charge, but there's a lot of entrenched forces there, a lot of institutions, a lot of guys who wish they were in charge, a lot of guys who like the old way of doing things, and they're highly skilled at politicking and turning people against you. So, in one way you're trying to get loyalty, and another way you're just trying to get people to like you. And you might need to lie. But at the end of the day, you got to work within their frameworks. And if you want to come in with a big bat and say, I'm in charge and I'm going to kind of change how you do things, you're going to have to kill a lot of people. And Machiavelli makes the case that Moses did that. The story of Moses was that he came in with a bunch of weapons and just started slaughtering people until he made them into what he wanted to do. Now, you can debate that all you want, but there is a way to move in and just start killing people until you kill all the people who would work against you till there's only you left. but then you're kind of ruling through fear, which is a different thing. Whereas what you want to do is get people to like you. And this is actually what Napoleon did, in my opinion. We talked about Napoleon's war. What he was doing was he was going to these nations and trying to build a French imperium. And again, he was anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, but he went to these Christian places and said, I'm Christian. I love Christ. You keep doing what you're doing. He kind of let them do what they were going to do anyway. So his way of trying to build his imperium was just letting them do whatever the fuck they want, basically, which is what Britain did in a lot of ways too, which is what led, I think, to their imperium falling. Anyway, but you gotta either get them on your side or kind of let them rule, and you're just a figurehead, which a lot of people don't want to do. But anyway, that's the rule. Like, figure out there's many different ways to do this, many different avenues you can go down. But at the end of the day, you gotta get people to like you and want you there, because on a long enough timeline, you will get ripped to pieces by these people, and there's not enough guns in the world, and there's not you can't stay awake 24/7 watching for all the daggers in the dark. It's just impossible. And then this book, The 48 Laws of Power, is funny, which is in a lot of ways just be enigmatic, be confusing, be cool, be mysterious. A lot of this stuff is about how to be mysterious and not let people think they can predict your movements. And that's what gives you value. Because let's say you are a competent leader and you install a bunch of these things people like and people love you, there will come a day where they say, why do we need this guy anymore? Like, how is he different than me? Because if you elevate your own people, if you do your job and elevate them, they'll start to think, well, what's so good about this guy? He's brought us to his level. So you always got to be, even if you're an organized crime, if you're the Don, if you're the skipper like Tony Soprano, there's got to be an element to you where no matter what, no matter how much you spread the wealth around and increase their standard of living, they still need you and they can't wrap their mind around you. There's some core thing. And so this book in a lot of ways was trying to almost introduce false confusion, like just be a dick randomly and just throw people off. But, I'm like, okay, but the core of it is be enigmatic, be a guy where people aren't convinced that they could just replace you. And that's usually done through kind of cultivating your own mythos. And whether or not you agree with this, he did make a few points that were kind of manipulative but funny, like mythologizing yourself. The communists do this a lot, like Mao did this, like increasing your own, you might call it a cult of personality, but really increasing like you are a figurehead and that not just anyone could be you, which is interesting that people do that in a movement that is all about the people. So think about that. Think you're starting a movement. You're trying to be of the people, first of all, and try to elevate the people, second of all, but you still kind of need to introduce the idea that you're apart from them without, using the same language as a king. That's seeing how they navigate that channel is kind of interesting to me. And it's happened. Like, look at the reverence they speak of Lenin with Mao, with any Che Guevara, like any of them. So there is still like they're of the people, but they are spiritually, or there's something about don't want to talk about spirituality, but they want to talk like these people. They want to wear their faces on a shirt. Yeah, I just thought that was kind of and you could say it's manipulation, but that seems to be the only way it fucking worked.
Yeah.
Even in a Marxist worldview where we don't have hierarchy, we still found a way for this guy to be at the top of the hierarchy, which was what, like, there was this quote I didn't get to when we were talking about Napoleon from the book Napoleon's Wars, that he went on kind of a big campaign and conquered a bunch of land. Then he came back to France, and for a period he was trying to be a statesman. And so he kind of he was taking on this personality of a civic leader. And he had this quote, I forget exactly when, but the quote was like, they're trying to say that I'm not a normal man. I'm the most normal man of all. And that's it. It's like, not only I'm the most normal, I'm more normal than all of you. That's why I'm at the top of the pile of normal. If it's that sort of thing. And I found that funny. But one thing, I don't want to go through all the laws because a lot of them are contradictory, where, one law, he'll be like, you need to make your enemy think you're weak and normal and that they're above you. Then the next law will be, you need to always make sure your enemy knows that you're above them. And he'll give historical precedents for this. Like, here's a situation where this, like, Selassie from Ethiopia. He met with one of the warlords, and he appeared very subtle and tricked him. But then, so like within these 48 laws, you will see contradictory laws, which means I guess they're not laws then. You know what I mean? They're just
exactly.
scenarios. And that's kind of what I get at. Is like there really are no laws aside from the three that I siphoned from that kind of reduced down to those three, and I think those have some value. But everything else you have to apply on a case by case basis, because what I guess what I'm trying to get at is this book is interesting because not because it is factual, but a lot of people read this book. And what I mean by that is you need to understand these quote rules because you are living in a world where other people believe these rules. And so to defeat their power play, you need to understand their power play. So in kind of in the same way that when we were reading up about the CIA and the KGB, when they would source spies, you would think it's not a James Bond, it's not a Jason Bourne. Usually if they're sourcing a spy, you're sourcing from people who want to be spies. You are sourcing from people who are joining the CIA because they want to be James Bond. They won't be, but you have to factor in like you're sourcing spies from a pool of people who watch spy movies. See what I'm saying? So it's
Right.
so when you're trying to achieve any sort of power or leadership, you're sourcing from people who've read books on how to be powerful and will probably be rolling out wrongly or clumsily rolling out these rules because they think this is how it does. So what I'm trying to say is like, it's not you're using these things in a vacuum. You need to exist in a world where people are fans of the 48 laws of power. So they're going to be like, very seriously going, I must keep my friends close, but my enemies closer. Now, that's not really true. You hear that a lot, like midwits say that, dumb people say that. But you're trying to be a leader of people who think they've read all the books on how to be a leader, so they think they can be leaders. So to lead them, you have to kind of lead them as if they were bad leaders. And if you were trying to recruit spies, you're not trying to transform someone into a spy. You have to work with people who already kind of think they're a spy and think they know how a spy acts. And you need to factor that into your plans and how you put them in the field. Because you're going to be dealing with people who think they're James Bond. And we're like, oh my God, okay, so I'm not dealing with blank slates here. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. It's the reason that I hate my job and I want to move to the woods. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
He's got some notes in here that I like that are kind of good sound bites, but they're more on what we were talking about before about the value of action and the act of manifesting things in the world. So, like one thing he says, and this was when we were covering guerrilla warfare, all those books, we went through a whole guerrilla war arc a while ago. The idea that, like in guerrilla warfare, you can't separate yourself with a fortress. Your authority requires social circulation. And when we talk about Machiavelli and the Prince, it's like, yes, to rule the people, you must be seen of the people. So you can't be in this tower far away. You need to be kind of circulating through. You need people to be your eyes and ears. You need to swim. Remember, it was Mao, I believe, who said that the gorilla must swim through the public like a fish swims through the ocean. So if you're a leader, and they did this in Iraq, when they were in Iraq and Afghanistan, the soldiers found like when they had a forward operating base way on the outskirts of town, it wasn't working. What they had to do was actually set up shop within the city. They needed to be close by to the city so they don't have the perception of an invading force that they're the separate entity. Like, we're of you. We start to dress like you. We talk like you. We get you. So that's for the soldiers, but also the people, whatever. But that was kind of one idea he had that I liked. And he had this one line that I really liked is intensity defeats extensity. So it's like, don't broaden your reach too much in what you're doing. Concentrate on what you know and are good at. Right. And this is what we were talking before about when you're starting a startup, that when you're starting a company, you might want to start this big thing versus what you should do is invest everything you've got into what you know and into what you're good at. So, and this is companies who are trying to expand and diversify too much. They see this all the time. Google saw this, like Thank God Google had all this government cheese and shit. But like of like the 200 companies Google would start or buy up, they might keep 20 of them. Because at a certain point they have to realize they might be salvaging it or whatever. But a lot of companies fail because they expand too much and they forget what it was they were good at. Social media platforms are good at this too. And what we were talking about with like Chairman Mao and stuff, and a lot of these communist leaders, like you need to recreate your actions in theater and myth. And that's kind of, and I think we kind of see that here on a lower level. Like when we talk, like when we have these debates, that's kind of our theater. When we have, we talk about politically provoked modern day debates, the kill stream and stuff, like really we understand that we're just seeing theater now. We're not seeing two people trying to change their mind. We're not even trying to see two people convince an audience a lot of the time. What we're seeing is a staged fight between two avatars of these ideologies that they might not even truly believe in. But we're just seeing, here's what happens when fascism fights Marxism and two schizos do it. It's like the only thing we can get from this is some kind of, I don't know, like it is theater, it's entertainment maybe, but it's something. It's something like where it's the mythology of these ideologies duking it out in front of a drunk audience.
Yeah.
Is in the same way you would watch a kabuki theater. And maybe I'm overthinking it, and maybe I'm giving too much of this, but that's kind of when people ask, why are we even doing these debates? Like, I think that's the only thing it can be, right? Some other stuff he's got is like every mistake entered with boldness can be countered with boldness. I actually like that. Like if you make a mistake, make it very angrily and never apologize for it. Just try and get out of the mistake with more anger. Like, okay, I like that. Like that's kind of like parenting. Like never admit to your kid that you did something wrong. Every mistake was on purpose, and fuck you, we're getting out of it. Or like when I get lost, and my wife, I took a route my wife told me not to take, and I took it. It looks like we're lost. Fuck you if you think I'm going to apologize to her. This was on purpose. This was me because I wanted to show her some new trees. And if she says that I made a mistake, I will yell at her.
I guess you don't like trees. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, sorry. I guess you're a bitch. I'm sorry. I want to drive this way, but it turns out I married a bitch. So if basically what I'm trying to take 48 laws of power and summarize it for practical purposes. So people, this is one of the laws was that. So apply that to getting into a fight with your wife. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. But guess what? You're testing your hypotheses. Reading this book, cover to cover, and there's some interest. He's a liberal sort of guy, so I don't even trust his read on history when he's talking about like Caesar Borgia or Cesare Borgia or something. I'm like, is that really what it was? Or is this your Wikipedia version of that? Is this kind of like your made for Joe Rogan version of history? Like Guns, Germs, and Steel is a lot like that. It's a very twisted, but it sounds good to a liberal mind.
Yeah.
But one thing I got from this, and I'm just saying this to say it out loud and test it out. It's like whatever you want to do, whatever goal you want to achieve, ask yourself what is the most unpredictable way possible that it could be achieved. I started thinking that. I thought that before the show. I'm like, let's say we want to get a new political ideology going. Let's say we want to court mainstream for like what is the most unpredictable way? Because we know the way it's been done in the past, and we duplicate the past at our peril. So we can say let's use the past and model it slightly differently. I'm saying maybe an accelerationist take. What's the craziest and most unpredictable way you can think of to achieve a goal, and pick that? And maybe we'll take a kind of a longer winding path to get there. But, in attuning yourself to these laws of power to make yourself unpredictable and new and fresh, would that be something that's useful? What does that sound stupid? Am I just reaching here?
I don't know. That kind of makes sense.
This is just me talking because I'm trying to find, I read this book. I'm trying to salvage something from it. But that got me thinking, like, because I do think those 3 rules, there's truth to them to be a figure. But I also think it's interesting because it is giving you instructions like Machiavelli to be a ruler who is disconnected from the people. So, they're giving you rules and tactics and strategies for how to be a boss, basically, but you haven't come up through that organization or those people or that religion or that bloodline or whatever it is. You're an outsider. So in a lot of ways, it's a very hyper capitalist and hyper liberal way of looking at it, like hiring a CEO. Okay, if you're hiring a CEO, they have to trick people into like, I belong here. Whereas traditionally, a leader would be maybe not democratically elected, but elected through the people in some way. Now, that could be a vote, that could be trial by combat, that could be two families joining together and having an offspring, and that offspring eventually become. You see what I'm saying? Like that was, it has to come up through organically, versus a lot of these modern views on power, which is just whoever's at the top is interchangeable. And if they are interchangeable, you need to employ this subversion and subterfuge and
Oh yeah,
trickery to do it.
I kind of see what you're saying. It's like I think we talked before the idea of the duality of meaning in the word authority. Like there's authority, authority as in I am holding the hammer over your head, which means I have literal authority, versus I am an authority on quantum physics because I know a lot. So you ought to listen to me. It's like an is ought thing, kind of, right? So there's like, I'm the CEO because I was appointed, but I don't have any real power, because if I go to try to exert power, it turns out that I'm totally impotent because I don't know what I'm doing. Versus authority, that like maybe you're not even the CEO, maybe you're just some lower level C-suite guy, but you're actually the one running the company because you're the one pulling the strings, because you know how the people work and you know where they go for lunch and you know all of their wives and their friends, and you have their ear, and you have, that's where the power actually stems from. I was saying before, like I get where they're coming from, that this is not, it's you I don't know, how to explain it. It's not a happy thing, it's not a friendly, it's a very, very cynical thing. And you have to look at people not as cooperative members of a team, but as people who they themselves think that they're the leader. They have their own plan. You're trying to co-opt their motivations to make them work for you without letting them know that you're doing that. And you have to do that en masse sometimes. And it's, even if you can do it, it's heartbreaking or frustrating.
And that's the hard thing about being a leader, is that you really do need to be a dick a lot of the time. So he makes a point in the book, and it says in the book, but I've experienced this in real life too, where there's some personality types, and they might not even be type A personalities, but there's someone who, if you slight them professionally, they will carry that grudge for the rest of their lives and commit their lives to trying to destroy you. Whereas a normal person would have some perspective or self-awareness to see the larger picture, and maybe that anger goes down over time. But there are certain narcissistic people who might smile in your face and stab you in their back just because they think they're not, maybe not in charge, but appreciated enough, or you chose someone else over them. And they might be your number two guy, but those are hard. It's hard to deal with those. It's hard to deal, and that's a personality thing. That's not, they don't have a really good reason for doing that, but they just feel like their ego was hurt so much that they will sell you out at the first chance because they couldn't handle that assault on their ego. And when you manage a team, and this is a political organization too, if you're starting a militia, if you're an Antifa, I guarantee you've dealt with this. If you're in the fucking Proud Boys, I guarantee you've dealt with this. And this is irrespective of ideology. Anytime you get usually men together, this is how it works. Women have a bit different rules, I think, but men, at least I can speak to that, when they get together, it's like, this is what you got to do. And you're going to have to maybe put a couple heads on sticks of guys you like and make an example of guys you like. And it's like, even in making an example, they might never forget that. And there's no good answer. And like we were talking about before, it's like, you might think that's just a cut you can bandage, and it turns out over the course of years that becomes a wound that kills you.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's really no way around that other than, like, I guess there's ways to address that, but don't think that can't fester over time. You know what I mean? And that when we talk about likability, so likability is like, oh, he's a cool, fun guy. It's like, no, they actually respect you and like you. And to make different people like you will take different tactics. It can't just be that you're nice. And a lot of ways, nice is going to work against you. in huge ways. The other thing I started thinking of is when we talked about Napoleon, and when you read this book, the highest thing you can achieve is glory. So Napoleon and maybe many leaders throughout history, but I bring Napoleon up that he wanted glory for France and he wanted glory for himself, but also that was aligned with France. He wasn't just a megalomaniac. He had a higher ideal, but glory for glory's sake, it makes me wonder if a lot of people would admit that glory is a worthwhile trajectory to have in life. That's something that everyone should want, but I don't know about that. I don't know about because that is by necessity expansionist. It is by necessity based on conquest. That glory comes hand in hand with conflict, but also sometimes unnecessary conflict, sometimes at the cost of the peace of other people. So it made me think that the desire for personal glory, we might say, oh, that's part of the Faustian spirit. That's part of what makes the West great. But I'm trying to reassess glory for glory's sake as something, because that's what would lead someone to want to achieve power for power's sake. And that's why when I talk about we have to, if you are a leader of men, you need to realize you might be leaders of men who read this book and take that into account. Like you are leaders of men who think that glory for glory's sake is the best you can do. So they don't care about maybe a higher civilizational ideal or a spiritual ideal or a ideal of the group that and maybe that to me is the biggest thing standing in our way, that when you read these books about how power works, you're part of a civilization where everyone's read these books and everyone thinks they all hate kings, but everyone thinks they can be a king. And I think that presents a very modern problem. I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So if you want to be a leader, or if you find yourself as a leader, you need to take that into account. I guess that's maybe my point.
How do you raise an army of little atomized princes who all think that they're the protagonist in their own little, Sunday drama? Yeah, it's very difficult.
And that's what you see in political movements, like even anarchist political movements, that I think you're going to see a lot of these people who hate power, but have been raised in this sort of atomized, I can be a king, I'm the main character of this story sort of thing. Anyway, that's really just what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to maybe discuss that book. I wouldn't recommend people really read it. It's pretty long. It's written interestingly because there's stuff written in the margins where he'll actually lead with the rule, whereas some books would have the conclusion at the end. He leads with the conclusion, which I think is the utility of that. I find interesting.
And you took of his 48 a very stretched list of rules. You took 3 that were the 3 that also lined up with the Art of War and the Prince. So it's fair to just say, if you haven't, read the Prince and the Art of War, and then
I'll just Law 30, make your accomplishments seem effortless. Let's give you a few right now. Okay, 27, play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. So start a cult. Keep your hands clean, which he expounds on that by saying get other people to do your dirty work. And again, I'm not sure that's the thing. I don't think you should just be beckoned for people, because he'll have another rule where saying you should be seen doing things yourself. I'm like, okay, well, I guess those are contradictory.
I was about to say, even the previous one about you said have other people do your dirty work, but then previously you said play off of people's need to believe. Well, I mean, usually if people believe, it's through works, right? So you have to show works. So if the reason that the works are great is because they're rare, they're usually rare because they're difficult, sometimes dirty. So if dirty works are the rare works, then you can't do them without dirtying your hands, but you need that in order to play off of belief. And then, it falls apart. Read Art of War. I don't know. It's just...
I like this. Law 21, play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. Then Law 28, interaction with boldness. Just be a violent retard is what I'm getting from this.
The 48 laws of schizo power. Yeah.
You'll be like, play a sucker to catch a sucker. Okay. But then it's like, make your opponent believe that you're smarter than them at all times. Like, okay, whatever. Discover each man's thumb screw, which means find their weakness. Okay, thank you.
Do we not like agree on what a rule is? Because you can't have 2 rules. You can't have 2 rules which are like immediately contradictory. Always make your opponent think you're smarter than them. Always make your opponent think that you're stupid and that they're also stupid, but you're dumber than them. Like, what the fuck?
Disdain things that you do not have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. It's just I see that, but it's also like you can't fuck the woman you want. It's like, I don't like her anyway. She's ugly. That's
Yeah.
I think people kind of see through that too. That's something even a peasant would see through.
That's more of a coping mechanism. I fail to see how that brings you any power. That doesn't make you more powerful. That just helps you cope.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I'm trying to go with. This one's actually good. Pose as a friend, work as a spy. Okay, well, all right. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. Learn to keep people dependent on you. A lot of it's really basic.
Yeah, it's basic stuff.
What is this? Play to people's fantasies. All right. What's another one here? Oh yeah, be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. But then this will go counter to people who are like, make sure you appear of the people to get their loyalty. This one just says master the art of timing. Okay, no shit. All right. Think as you like, but behave like others. Law 38. Yeah. Okay, well,
Rule 32. Get good.
Rule 32. Why don't you just be a king? Rule 43. Have you considered being smart?
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love blood satellite.